One of the most difficult things about sharing your faith is when people ask difficult questions and not having some sort of answer for it. In today's video, I'm going to tell you how I would answer one of the most difficult questions. Let's go ahead and get into it.
Someone gets cancer or an earthquake kills thousands of people. God either caused this to happen or he didn't.
If God is all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing, why is there evil?
Something terrible happens and you can't help but wonder why God didn't either do something, why did he allow this? That's one thing that casts doubt in my mind on this God being the God that you should obey or listen to.
If you haven't figured it out already, the question that needs to be answered is, why does God allow suffering? Why does he allow evil in this world? And if you're like me, you've asked this question numerous amounts of times in your life. I have been in situations where I can guarantee you I was no less than cursing God out on at least a weekly basis because of the amount of suffering, the amount of pain that I was going through. And I was just asking God why. But one of the things that I knew I did not want to do in that time period was completely be absent of him. Even though I knew he could change the situation could be different because of his very existence. He could snap his fingers and bring me out of the suffering and pain. But I knew that absent of God, things would be far worse. And I also knew that as long as I loved God, all things would be worked out in favor of me, in favor of my situation. As long as I could keep my eyes on God, I know that no matter what I go through, at bare minimum, I will be sitting in paradise with Jesus Christ one day. But what do we answer people with on the streets, at work, at school, when they ask, why does God allow suffering? Why would a all-powerful and just God allow little kids to die of cancer? Why would he allow a family's house to burn down and everybody, including the 5-month-old baby inside the house, burn alive? And maybe this is a little graphic for you, but these are real questions that real people have. These are real situations that people suffer with. So I think we really need to sometimes get a good idea of some of the things that people go through when they ask these questions. Why do they ask them? Well, they've experienced suffering that they don't know how to explain. And you may not be able to explain it fully to where they're going to be accepting what you say. But there is a way to explain it that will at least get them thinking and maybe understanding a little bit about why suffering exists in this world. One concept that I want people to think of when it comes to why suffering and evil exist in this world is the fact that God can choose to limit his power. Because the answer can simply be answered with that right there. God chooses to limit his own power. But there are examples of this, and there's even one example that begins all of the suffering, all of the evil that allows it to exist and affect humankind. Let's look at the most obvious answer, or obvious example, of where Jesus and God choose to limit their power. Well, Jesus is the perfect example of the limit of God choosing to limit his power, because Jesus comes down. He experiences all suffering. He experiences all temptation. He dies on the cross, and he resurrects 3 days later. Now, there is no other God or religion that showcases sacrificial love. And the only way that our religion could showcase sacrificial love is if God chose to limit his power, become human, and dwell among us, and in limiting his power, allow himself to experience excruciating pain and death. And it's only in that limitation that he put within himself that he could experience all that, because we all know that at any point in time, Jesus could have snapped his fingers and got off that cross, killed everybody that chose to persecute him, and walk away. Instead, he chose to suffer, he chose to die, and he chose to defeat death once and for all, for our benefit. But where did it all start? Where does the suffering and the evil come into play? Well, we have to go all the way back to Genesis. We have to think about Adam and Eve. We have to think about the fact that they were given basically a paradise, and the only thing that they really had to do was just trust that God was all they needed. But they didn't. Instead, they ate it. They ate of the fruit, the forbidden fruit, the one thing God said, don't do this. And that was him giving them that free will to rebel against him, because he wanted them to not just exist in a limited environment where all they had to do was listen to him and no other choice. No, that he wanted to give them a choice. He wanted to give humanity the ability to experience what true love is. And there cannot be true love absent of somebody being given a choice. And Adam and Eve was given that choice. And in their choice, they made the wrong one. Therefore, all of creation is now living in a fallen world where God is not constantly putting his hand in every single situation and making it come out the way that he wants it to come out. And I think it's a very hard concept for a lot of people to understand, because free will and God's sovereignty, they exist, right? So we have free will, but God is also sovereign. And in a lot of situations, those two things seem to coexist. And sometimes our decisions, I know for a fact, can be absent of what God's wanting to happen, but because he loves us, he doesn't choose to just put his fingers like a puppet and make us do what we want. If you think about the alcoholic that gets in the car, chooses to drink and drive, and then kill somebody, and maybe even kill themselves, that's not what God wants to do. He doesn't want that person to be a drunkard. He doesn't want that person to become essentially a murderer, because now he's responsible, he or she is responsible for killing somebody, but they had a free will and a choice to get in that car and now drive down the highway knowing the likelihood of killing somebody, and they made that decision. God did not stop them, even though he knew what was best. He knew that that was not best for that situation. But where I really come to terms with the fact that sometimes things in this world are going to affect me in a negative way because I live in a fallen creation, is that I know that I love God. And I know that he says, for those who love him, all things will work out for good. But if you're watching this video and you don't love God, you really have to pay attention to that, right? Because it's not God saying that he's going to work out things in the good for all people. No, he says that he is going to work out all things for good for those who love him. So when you have a love for God and you seek him out, he is going to be in all of those situations. It's not that you're not going to experience the storms of life or the things, the hardships, the things that you may even go through, even like I went through, where I'm questioning God every second of the way, but I know that I love him and I trust him. So I always circle back around to prayer, to worshiping, to raising my hand even when it feels hard, to raising my hand even when it feels heavy, right? But that's all to say, the answer of why there's evil and why there's suffering, it all has to do with that love that God had for us in the beginning. The love that he had, that he wanted to be true love. He wanted it to be a love that was given a choice. He wanted it to be in such a way that we could say no to loving him, but he wanted to have a creation that could choose. Just like if you were to ask someone to marry you, you could not force them to do so. And if you did force them to do so, it would not be true love. It would just be contractual. Well, God wanted true love. He wanted us to be able to choose him over the world. And unfortunately, there are so many out there that choose the world over God. And in a world like this, you have to be able to explain to somebody when they're going through pain and suffering, when they're going through those things, the only way you can maybe make them make sense of it all is by explaining that God truly loves them and that he didn't want this for them. He wants them to come to him in a humble heart and to choose them, or them to choose God out of love, because he's chosen them. He chose us in the beginning, and he chose us when he sent his son to die for us. And I think as long as we can really have faith and choose God, it doesn't matter what kind of storm we're going through, it doesn't matter what kind of suffering we experience, we know that Jesus is by our side. We know that the devil is defeated, that this battle may be hard, but the war is already won. We know that Jesus defeated death, and that one day we'll be with him as long as we put our faith and trust in Jesus Christ.